How was the party?
What party? I didn't get
Right? You a part of it? That's right. I'm like, make it easy for fifth grade. Fifth grade. All right, you're getting some pages back. Notes go under notes. Vocab goes under vocab. Have quite a lot to get to today, so help me out by letting us get there. Yeah, if it's notes, I file under notes. Vocab, you file under vocab. You know what each looks like at this point. Doing pretty good to access the color printer along the way. I'm giving you vocab for today. This next chunk. Your vocab for today. So probably getting a lot of papers coming at you. Road to the Civil War. That's where we're at today. Literally the word my ankle. Ankle like a grown adult.
I was yesterday, and he was on the same road as
Felt that? I bet I can make it better.
No, you're
about to have
make it worse.
Awesome conversation that will.
Blake, hurry up.
Oh, there it is. All right, phones up. Go time. Don't send your poll. I'll put on a fire for you. How about that? You told me nothing. All right, let's get situated. At this point, road to the Civil War is what I should see. You should have pencils. Get ready. Other notes filed. Definitely don't see phones because we're going to have a real grown-up conversation today about a big topic. Big topic. It's going to take us to war. It's our march to war. I'm feeling I'm about to perplex a couple of y'all. So, in our conversation, that will be the road to the Civil War. Okay, it's time. The road to the Civil War. I have a question for you. Haven, how do you boil frog? I don't know about that.
Tom, give me a second. You can rotisserie.
Some of you are answering like the elephant question. Put it in, I'll probably start with my water.
Yeah, but you just throw it in there.
You just up and throw it in there.
Oh, yeah.
If you have a roiling pot of water, and you take a live frog, and you throw it into the pot of water, what will it do? It will jump right back out. If, hear me now, this is my whole setup, this is why we have the water going. If you put a frog in a pot of water, and then turn on the heat, and you gradually increase the heat, he won't know what's coming, and when the water starts to boil, he will be cooked. Welcome to our conversation of how our country gradually, event by event, year by year, decade by decade, turned up the heat in the issues that divided us, very namely slavery. And before we knew it, we were cooked. We were in a roiling hot pot of water, and we had turned the heat up gradually until the point that we were cooked. This is how, I will now turn the volume off. This is how the road to the Civil War is much like, boiling a frog. So keeping that analogy in mind, I love how some of you went to how to eat an elephant. Okay, I mean, you've listened over the past 2 years, how to eat an elephant. You tried to answer it along those lines. Haley, would you say one leg at a time? You thought through the process, well, you just put it in the pot of water. But then I do think you had the aha moment. I hope you won't forget this. You had the aha moment where you're like, oh, if it was just boiling hot from the get-go, that frog would run out, jump out. But if we gradually turn up the heat, kind of like a hot jacuzzi tub, eventually the water boils and the frog gets cooked. This is how our country walked our way to a civil war. It did not just happen. Today we're going to talk about a lot of things. We got to lay the foundation. It's going to kind of be one chunk at a time, one term at a time. Together, I think it makes a cohesive story. Welcome to history. But once we walk this road from Manifest Destiny to the Civil War, to the election of 1860, bam, we will have ourselves with a full-fledged war on our hands. So the page you have in front of you, I'm asked you to do a lot today. I am. Some days we had like 1 and 2 vocab terms at a time. Today we're going to drive through all of these vocab terms, one little chunk at a time. Now hear me. I am going to give you that nice, clean definition. The starting slide for each is going to kind of be that nice, tidy definition. Coming your way, great. You guys have done very well on notes. By and large, I can look at it and go check. This student completed these notes. Some of you are still not putting your name on it or in the right place. Some of you are still stapling it like in the middle of the page. By and large, we're doing pretty good on notes, what I would expect from an honors class. So keep that up. We are going to drill the vocab, and we're going to have review along the way because we're walking towards an exam on March 2nd. We got a funky little setup coming our way. A 4-day week and a 3-day week. Right? I know you're going to sleep in between. I know you're going to forget some things in between. So I'm going to reiterate along the way. If you feel like I've said a term more than 5 times and you got it, fine. But pay attention because I've said it 5 times for a reason. If you feel like I'm saying a term and you're not quite sure that you got it, but I have said it more than once, you better lean into that one because that's an important term. In the history of your country's story, I'm telling you one chunk at a time. So here we go. This is what's in front of you. It's the road to the Civil War. We finished Manifest Destiny, having acquired all of our territory. We're going to walk ourselves to the election of 1860 today. So first, Missouri Compromise. Now, this is the one repeat term. Pretty important, though. Hint, pretty important. Remember, when Missouri applied to be a state, the balance in our union at the time was a perfect 11 and 11. 22 states, 11 free in the north, 11 slave in the south. Right? We kind of had different personalities north to south. That's a big part of our country's issue is the different personalities in different sections. So when Missouri applies to be a state, and it's going to make an odd number of states in our union, well, we're going to have a problem. The balance is going to be upset in some fashion. If Missouri is admitted as a slave state, then the slave states will hold the power. If Missouri is admitted as a free state, then the free states will hold the power. That is not acceptable to either. So we come up with a compromise. The compromise means a little bit of your side and a little bit of my side. It's pretty good life advice to come to a compromise whenever you have a disagreement. Well, the compromise here is called the Missouri Compromise. Missouri's in the name. It does involve another state. What's that other state? Mm-hmm. Excellent. What's the cheeky way I gave you to remember it? M&M's. There you go. Not Skittles. M&M's. Missouri and Maine. So instead of admitting just one state and upsetting the balance of power, we admit 2 at the exact same time. Okay, even Steven. Now we have 12 and 12, 12 free, 12 slave. Cool. Maine is in the north. Naturally, Maine is admitted as a free state. Missouri is south and east. Today, they do find themselves in the Southeast Conference somehow. So Missouri, being in the more southern region, more agrarian and plantation based, is admitted as a slave state. But boy, howdy, wouldn't it be great if we could come up with a solution to future territories who apply to become states? How in the world could we solve this conversation once and for all, not have to argue about it each time? What do we come up with? This is review, I hope you remember.
3630.
Excellent, the 3630 line of latitude. 3630, right? It's on the map. You know, it's not a river, it's not a road, it's not a mountain range. It's a line of latitude. The line of latitude on the map, 3630. It is the southern boundary of Missouri. The agreement is that north of that line, all future territories will be considered free states. South of that line, all future territories who apply to become states will be considered slave states. The one current exception, because it's in the middle of the agreement, the one current exception is Missouri. Missouri does find itself north of that line, but is admitted as a slave state. Now, in particular, this does apply to the Louisiana territory, Louisiana Purchase territory that hasn't been settled into states yet. We can't quite say that we have the Spanish possessions, that Mexican cession, not cessation, the Mexican cession. We're not quite there yet. So the agreement applies to the Louisiana Purchase. But this is a plan for how to solve it going forward. Do you think it's a good plan?
No.
No, why not?
Because
Yes,
Louisiana
states like
Purchase is above the
California.
line.
Because most of the Louisiana Purchase is above the line, so that's going to naturally lead to
There's more free states.
Now there is that Arkansas territory below the line, but you're right. There's a lion's share of the territory above the line.
They
Christy?
give states like California half above and half below.
Okay, now, yep, so we know, I have taken us through Manifest Destiny, we know we're gonna acquire that territory, but at the time of the compromise, that wasn't quite in the conversation just yet. We didn't formally have possession of that. I like to give this an analogy of slapping a Band-Aid on the problem, right? Not really solving the problem, kind of just pushing off those tensions for another decade or so. At least we didn't go to war today at the time of the compromise, but we're really just kind of pushing the real issue on down the way. Kind of like putting a Band-Aid on the problem, and our frog has its heat turned up just a little bit more, right? Our frog is in the pot of hot water, and the heat is turned up just a little bit more. As the great American philosopher Taylor Swift might say, Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes. You say sorry just for show. You live like that, you live with ghosts. So really earth-shattering thought process there. Come on, somebody, that was good. Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes. All we did was put a Band-Aid on it. We kicked the problem on down the line. Let's see how it's going to shake out as things continue to develop. All right, your next vocab term on your page, and what we're going to talk about is the Second Great Awakening. Now, we have a Second World War, implies the First World War. We have a Second Great Awakening. What do we know it implies?
There was the first one.
There was a first one. Tell me a little bit about that First Great Awakening. All things all at the same time. Okay, religion, keywords, man. Hellfire and brimstone. Yeah, sinners in the hand of angry God. Savannah, you remember the name? Jonathan Edwards, that's right. Bacon County Fire Department, you lied and we fight them. She was. Wait, it's not even think about that because it's house fire anymore. That's what it is. All right, back on track. I always like to answer the phone a different way with Miss Vicky. Yeah, the First Great Awakening. Okay, the Puritan values, it implies a religious revival. I don't know if any of your churches run a midsummer, Wednesday night revival, whatever, but that's what this was a spiritual revival. Notable of it, okay, amidst class tensions, male, female, black, white, brown, Indian, amidst a variety of differences, this Great Awakening does appeal to all social classes, both genders, all type of human. Okay, so religion is the binding or the connector at this point in our country's history. And then in particular, okay, you could go a variety of directions with the Second Great Awakening. You could really get into the church history of it. That's not what this class will do. But there are three notable takeaways from the Second Great Awakening. And this kind of feeds these divisions that we have at a larger scale as well. So the first big takeaway is, these are the same words for you still writing notes. One, the temperance movement, and that does not mean it's the same notes. It does not mean temper, like if you have a bad temper, you get angry. Temperance actually means moderation. So the temperance movement is related to alcohol specifically. the belief, okay, and this is, I mean, take it from a religious perspective. The belief was that alcohol is bad, alcoholism is bad, dad gets drunk, dad gets angry, dad beats mom, that's bad. I'm not going to go any deeper on that. The belief was that alcohol is bad. So the temperance movement was an abolishment of alcohol, right? Don't drink. You're not a Christian if you do. If you drink, you're not religious. You know, the whole package there. There's threads of that conversation in churches still today. Okay, you know, plenty of up and down about can
They could have
Christians.
went about that better, because like there's some people who are like addicted to it and have to have it. They could have said like, if you're just starting out, you can't drink alcohol. Like,
Chrissy,
if
you're
you've
right. It's a
never
big
had it.
topic. They didn't have any ifs. Okay, they didn't have any ifs to it. They said alcohol is bad. We will continue to see this. This is not the last time we're going to talk about alcohol in this class, if you can believe it or not. We're going to arrive at a full-on prohibition amendment, an illegal banishment of alcohol in our country, but I'm getting 2 steps ahead of myself. Temperance, in the temperance movement, no alcohol, alcohol is bad. Rooted in this religious great awakening. Women's suffrage. What is suffrage? Please don't say suffering.
Right to vote.
Suffrage is the right to vote, right? I've detoxed a lot of words with you guys, tell you what the Latin meaning is, tell you what the Greek meaning is for a variety of words. Suffrage actually means in Latin the right to vote. Now we have suffering, and that means like it's so hot outside I was suffering, or that CrossFit workout made me suffer. Not the same word. Not the same word, okay? If you want to sound uneducated, you can say that the women were suffering. That's not what it is.
I mean, they were.
Women suffrage, that's all it is, but that's not what it is. Women's suffrage is the right to vote. Hey, if we finish with enough time, I'll show you a really funny Jimmy Kimmel video that I just thought of as well.
Alright, let's keep them slide.
Women's right to vote, okay? So it is rooted in religion, okay? You know, this second great awakening is on the side of women. Not a lot of things in the world are on the side of women at this point. But this religious second great awakening is on the side of women and is in favor of women voting. So we are still several steps away from women getting the right to vote officially from our government. But the second great awakening is a part of women getting the right to vote. And then third, improved public education for all. Okay, now, boundaries. We're not talking enslaved Africans. We're not talking their children. But public education for rich and poor, boy and girl, okay, so improved public education. It's one of those religious perspectives. Everybody should be educated. This also leads to, and this is extra, I don't have this written down, this leads to the abolition movement. We're going to talk about abolitionism full on here in just a second. So it all starts amidst the bad, amidst the compromises, amidst the Band-Aids, amidst the heat being turned up in our country and the frogs starting to boil. The second great awakening is kind of a religious oasis, if you will. Okay, a nice drink of cool water amidst the boiling frogs. So the second great awakening, pretty important in that regard. Again, is a hallmark by religion, and that's just kind of a picture to show that. So, plugging right along, questions so far? Doing pretty good. We're laying a foundation of vocab, okay? We're not going to play with any cheese puffs. We're not going to hunt any witches today. This is a day where we got to lay the vocab foundation so we can kind of have fun in future days. Moving right along, abolitionism, and then as a person, you might say abolitionist. This definitely has a branch off of the Second Great Awakening, okay? A religious movement that leads to the abolitionism movement. Abolition movement, you know, by definition, is a organized movement to end slavery in the United States. So not just because they were Northerners who didn't have a plantation, but because they were humans who believed that slavery was wrong. Abolitionists, that's how you would say, you know, abolitionism, that's the movement. Abolitionists, that's what you would call a person who believes in it, or just abolition, right? That's the actual word itself, the verb. But abolitionists could be from the North or from the South. They could be white or they could be black. They could be male. They could be female. Abolition, you know, to be an abolitionist just means you believed in the abolishment of slavery. First leaders of the campaign, they actually, believe it or not, Britain banned slavery about 40 years before we do, right? Ooh, big bad Britain, King George, redcoats, they're the enemy. They actually banned slavery about 40 years before we do. Well, because of that, I would say they're the good guys in that regard. Because of that, abolitionists in the United States are able to model their behavior and say, hey, this is what worked in their campaign. This is what we can try to do here as well. So over about a 40-year period, 1830s on through the formal abolition of slavery with the 13th Amendment. So, that's kind of the end of the abolition. Once slaves were free, there's not an abolitionist movement so much anymore. But they did model the abolition movement in Great Britain as well. And then you see in yellow there, an abolitionist is a person who opposes slavery. Some famous ones, Frederick Douglass. What type of person is he? What's that?
He didn't know his birthday.
Okay, but what type of person is he?
He's a black person.
There you go, he's a black man. Black man. There you go. Frederick Douglass is a free black man. Harriet Tubman, what kind of person is she? A formerly enslaved black woman. So I told you abolitionists can be on both sides. It obviously makes sense that African Americans were fighting for their own freedom. But William Lloyd Garrison, type of guy is he?
He's white.
He's a white guy. The Grimke sisters. White sisters who did, and female at that. Okay, so I just show you those examples, and here's some pictures, a variety of pictures. Frederick Douglass on the left. That's William Lloyd Harrison. The second one, that is one of the Grimke sisters. I'm sorry I can't say which. That is John Brown, and then I forgot her name, but we are going to talk about her later this week. So that just shows male, female, black, white, different walks of life. Abolitionists come from all walks of life. They are people who oppose slavery. Really important to say they're not Northerners, right? The North is against slavery. Abolitionists come from all walks of life. You could get into, actually a better picture here, right? Variety of abolitionists. And you didn't just have to live in the 1830s either. A variety of early presidents were opposed to slavery. John Quincy Adams being one of them, for example. Was that? Susan B. Anthony. I don't know where she falls on abolition. She's more of a women's rights person. Yeah. We'll talk about her. She's a couple decades past this. Couple decades past this. Oh, I know what you're talking about. Those music videos are fun. You guys like that stuff?
Yeah.
You want to wrap it out to like the 4th grade music videos?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Abolition, abolish, abolitionism, abolitionist. We got it? We got it to do away with slavery? All right. Well, this leads to, again, boiling pot. The heat on our frog is being turned up. Leads to a variety of slave rebellions. And we are specifically going to talk about 2. So on your page, you have space to talk about these 2 slave rebellions. This is slaves taking their own fate into their own hands, you might say. It is slaves rising up against their white masters. There's a real tricky piece of slavery here where some slave masters saw themselves as good slave masters. Do you think there's any such thing as a good slave master?
Like, not by the sound of it, no.
I hope the answer is no, because that person still owns.
But like,
Slaves.
Benjamin Franklin, like, are good. I mean, they can act like they own.
All right, so big topic here. Big topic. I'm just gonna open it up, right? I'm
Can I
gonna,
explain?
yes, Chrissy, yes.
They can act like they own them, but instead helping them escape.
Okay, I hear that.
That's what I was.
A lot of times, so the so-called good slave owner is a slave owner who didn't whip his slaves too much, or a slave owner who let slave families live together, right? A good, hey, I know, I believe you guys are on topic. I generally hear good chatter, but at the same time, I got to know you're like leaning into me, okay? A good slave owner was still a slave owner. So these slaves in confinement, I would argue, had every basic human obligation to try to break their confinement, to try to break their chains. And that's what a couple of these slave treatments did, or that's what a couple of these slave rebellions did. So first, Nat Turner, I want you to note the year, 1831. Okay, so we're kind of walking ourselves towards the election of 1860. You can see that the heat got turned up gradually over decades till we were at the boiling point. Nat Turner was actually a black preacher. He was an enslaved man, but he was a preacher. He believed his mission on earth from God, so it brings a little religious perspective to it. He believed his mission on earth from God was to free his people from slavery. There's actually a story where he had a vision, he had a dream, and the way that the stars lined up in the sky, like, was his vision from God saying that you are meant to free my people through armed rebellion. So kind of take that religious perspective, right? How can you deny a vision from God that motivates a lot of people? He leads rebellions on 4 plantations in Virginia. So Virginia, southern plantation economy. He leads uprisings on 4 different plantations. And in total, over the course of his, rebellion, about 60 white people were killed. He eventually was captured. He and his followers were put on trial. They were executed. So over the course of his rebellion, 60 white people died. Okay, they were targeting slave owners. But it does come to an end, right? He's not the rebellion that broke slavery, because he was captured, he was put on trial, he was hung, he was executed. From this, how do you think white slave owners responded to Nat Turner's rebellion?
Bought more slaves.
Bought more slaves? I'll hear that. They at least didn't stop buying slaves.
They got more rights.
How would they, say it again? Harsher treatment to the slaves who survived the rebellion, or the slaves who maybe even didn't have anything to do with the rebellion, but because some slaves revolted, well, now the slave owners, fearing for their lives, right? Some of their friends, 60 of their friends died. Now they crank down even harder on the slaves who did survive. So fear, anger, you don't have to ride. Yeah, right. Got the wolf by the ear, right? How do you release a wolf? When you're holding a wolf by its ears, how do you release it? Thomas Jefferson didn't know how. He knew that it was dangerous, but he feared that releasing it would destroy the country. You guys are on track. We've had some good conversations in this class so far. Big takeaway, no need to write every word on this screen right here. Lots of fear, lots of anger. You know what a real interesting side effect was from this? What did I say Nat Turner's job was?
Preacher.
He's a preacher, right? So you know what black people couldn't do anymore? Gather at church. Yeah, none of them could be preachers anymore. So that sucks, right? All right, that takes away from the religious side of it. Other impacts, since this happened in Virginia, which is going to become a leading figure in the Civil War, and a lot of good Civil War generals. Come on now, y'all. Like, come on. Virginia is going to become a leading figure in the Civil War. Virginia, at this time, 1831, was on the edge of considering abolishing slavery. What if Virginia had been the first southern state to abolish slavery? Maybe, just maybe, we would have avoided the Civil War. Well, no, we'll never know. It's not what happened. But because of this, Virginia now cranks down even harder on slaves and does not consider banning slavery anymore. So, kind of like Bacon's rebellion, right? The indentured servants rise up against and contributes even more to slavery. Nat Turner's rebellion kind of makes them crank down, makes the white slave owners crank down harder on their slaves, and unfortunately contributes to the lasting impact of slavery. Instead of ending slavery, it kind of perpetuates it for several more decades. Question.
What is a rebellion?
What is a rebellion?
Yeah, like what did it do?
You're trying to overthrow something that exists,
Well, what is
such as, synonym is revolution. The American Revolution was a rebellion.
Hey.
Or rebelling against England.
Did he kill people?
No,
No.
Why did
Him, but like,
His
then,
people.
so,
So from a military perspective, when I'm the company commander and my company goes on a mission and we kill 10 bad guys, you would say Captain Swanson's company killed 10 bad guys. Did I kill 10 bad guys? Not directly, but my forces did. So Nat Turner's forces, his rebels, killed 6 guys.
So you didn't want to okay with this?
Yeah, because they were slave owners.
I don't know, he's a preacher, he should have not been.
But his mission from God was
His
to.
mission from God was not to kill people.
Haven and I are having a great little side conversation, right? She says, how can he be a preacher? Come on now.
And a murderer.
How can he be a preacher and a murderer? Well, you gotta consider a soldier's perspective. Well, that's right. Are American soldiers who killed the Taliban murderers?
No.
Bigger question than we have time to answer. Nat Turner did not see himself as a murderer. Okay, leads us to John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia. That word's not on the screen. Now, this launches us a couple decades forward, and actually, in our next couple vocabs, we're actually going to take a half step backwards, but I want to put this here because it's a slave rebellion. 1856, Nat Turner, 1831, cranking the heat up. John Brown, 1856, cranking the heat up. Picture on the screen here, this is John Brown, okay, in the year 1856, or slightly prior to that, this is John Brown posing for his glamour shot. Well, John Brown, very similar to Nat Turner, he believed he had a mission from who?
God.
That's right, he believed he had a mission from God to end slavery. He brings together his family, okay, we the Browns, we're in this together, and some other neighboring abolitionists. They start there, they're white, okay, they are white. They are fighting on behalf of enslaved black people. They start their mission, their rebellion in Kansas. In Kansas, they have a small go at it. They kill 5 people, 5 slave owners initially. Peyton, is that a massacre? Depends on what the newspaper says about it. But I'm making the point that the Boston Massacre only killed 5 people. Well, they leave Kansas, okay, before they're arrested, before they go to justice or anything like that. They leave Kansas and they head to the heart of the South, Virginia, the exact same place that Nat Turner had his rebellion. They go to Virginia. And what they do in Virginia is they're not just taking pot shots. They're not trying to attack just one farm at a time, 1 farm, 2 farms, 3 farms. They want to take hold of a federal munitions factory and get weapons and ammo. Not all that different from how the battles of Lexington and Concord started. So welcome to history repeating itself. So John Brown, his family, his followers, they seize what is known as Harper's Ferry. It's a federal arsenal, a federal munitions factory or storage location. Harper's Ferry, Virginia. This is where the story starts. Now, at Harper's Ferry, they get in, but they can't get out. Because who shows up? The U.S. Army, that's right, the U.S. Army, go ahead and put that on. The Union Army, for that matter, okay, because it's the U.S. Army, there's not a Confederate Army just yet. The Army shows up, military shows up. So, let me take back here. So this is John Brown when he starts his raiding in Kansas. This is John Brown as he heads out west of Virginia, or east of Virginia. Yeah, what's changed? What's changed?
He's old.
The beard, he's older.
Chelsea, if you want
Right?
to paint.
Does he look a little crazier in the eyeballs?
No.
I don't know, his eyes are kind of fiery either way, right? Point is, he has taken on almost this Moses-like appearance. And if you see yourself as on a mission from God or as a prophet of some sort, he grows his beard, he's a wandering Israelite. This is his perspective, right? He takes on this Moses-like appearance. All right, move on to, this is 1859. Okay, so I know we're a couple of, this goes on for a long time. 1859 is this raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia. It's John Brown with his family and some freed black slaves. He has built his army. He is running a slave rebellion as the white man in favor of breaking slavery. He's leading a slave army, basically. This is in modern-day West Virginia, the state of West Virginia, but at the time we would call it Virginia. So he takes over the arsenal. If you're going to have an army, you're going to need weapons. His goal is to steal weapons and ammunition from Harper's Ferry. Well, when the army shows up, who's leading them? Colonel Robert E. Lee, who goes on to be what? General of the Confederate Army. Robert E. Lee. Now, the irony here, and maybe I nerd out from a military perspective more than you do, the irony here, this is Colonel Robert E. Lee of the United States Army. He's wearing blue. He belongs to the United States Army. He has not yet broken away. He's about to, but he has not yet broken away to the Confederate States. So really ironic that Robert E. Lee, future leader of the Confederate Army, has a pretty big role in capturing John Brown here at Harper's Ferry. Picture you see top right, obviously it's a sketch of sorts. It just kind of shows them inside the arsenal. They take some casualties. They've got wounded. They're shooting back. It's crazy inside of the raid. Picture on the bottom, I'll go ahead and do this. This is a portrait that was painted long after the fact. Much like many of the portraits we've looked at recently, it's representative. Okay, it's not to say this is exactly what happened. But if you were to look at this picture, what are some details that stand out to you?
Confederate flag at the United States.
Okay, so the people down low, we're butting up. We're about to clash. We're about to have a U.S. versus Confederate clash, right? That classic USA versus CSA portrait we see a lot of times, representing the Civil War. So I see that as well. What else?
On the heads.
What about heads?
They're on their heads.
Oh, who are they stomping on?
Russian school.
The slave owner.
Yeah, they're stomping on the memory of the dead, or they're just stomping over whoever they have to in order to advance their cause a little bit. Maybe that's what that represents. What does John Brown look like? What's John Brown look like?
That's scary.
Crazy.
Crazy.
Was
I thought
okay. Let me go back. What does this John Brown look like?
Very
He's measured, reasonable, a father, right? He's a household leader. What does this John Brown look like? Oh, he grew the beard, but does he look crazy?
Yes.
Debatable, debatable. This John Brown, though, he's yelling.
He looks very.
His eyes look a little bit fiery and crazed. What do you think that the painting is trying to say about John Brown?
He was crazy.
Stay away.
Yeah, he was crazy. He's a crazy Christian. He's irrational. You're not supposed to go on a slave rebellion, like all those kinds of things. So this portrait is pointing out the craziness, that's an opinion, of John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. Now, some of you say, why the tornado? I think it's because it shows how widespread his raids were. It started off in the Midwest, Kansas. It goes to Virginia, which is more to the east. The fire in the background, much like the boiling point of our frog being turned up. So, you could go a lot of directions with this portrait. I just want to show that he was kind of made out to be a crazy guy. If you want to evaluate it from a measured perspective, you could say he was a good guy who was trying to bring freedom to slaves. If you want to take it from a propaganda perspective, you make a painting like this and say John Brown was crazy and he deserved to get arrested and killed. So kind of take that either way. Here's the end of John Brown. This painting is actually called, let me get right here, it's called The Last Moments of John Brown, because what does it look like? What's going on here? Yeah, you can't see? I'll go ahead and do this. He looks like death.
He's hugging
a baby.
He's kissing the black lady.
Yeah, okay, so the white hair, you see Moses with the white hair now?
Favorite right there.
I don't see.
Gotta get out of my confines here. All right, this is John Brown. He's in shackles, so let me take the rest of the story. He was arrested for his raid on Harper's Ferry. He was put on trial. Do you think he was found innocent or guilty? Guilty of what? What are you guilty of?
Murder.
Treason. Yeah, treason, reasonably murder as well, but he's found guilty of treason. So the standard sentence of the day would be what?
Execution.
Execution by hanging. This is a portrait. Now this came out a little bit after the fact, but it shows a very, very different John Brown, wouldn't you say? Crazy versus kindly, grandfatherly, and someone already pointed it out. Who is he showing affection to? The black baby, right? So he really was a freer of the slaves, not some crazy revolutionary. He walked, as the story goes, he walked willingly to the gallows. He understood his fate. He had already made his stand. He was hanged. He died in 1859, before the Civil War even happens. So he will never in particularly know what came of his efforts, at least not in this life. Ironically, you want to know who was present at his execution?
John Robert E. Lee.
What you got? What'd you say? John F. Kennedy.
John Quincy Adams.
John, you had me at John. John Wilkes.
Oh,
John Wilkes Booth. Where does
One
this
that
guy
killed
come
Abraham Lincoln. One that killed him.
I know.
He killed Abraham Lincoln.
So that is an extra little side fact. Present at this execution is John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth is a rabid sectionalist. Okay, he is an ardent Southerner who very much believes in slavery.
And killed him.
He believed that he was seeing a crazy man be executed, and you know what it did? It whet his appetite for violence. Okay, this is in Booth's own journals that I've read a little bit of. It whet his appetite for violence, and it kind of leads to him being the one who shoots Abraham Lincoln 5 years later. From this, No, initially, this is important, guys. Come on, we'll take our bathroom break right after this. Initially, Northerners and Southerners were unified in their disgust for Brown because they only saw the violent side of it. Initially, Brown was really written off as a radical, but eventually, the Northerners, especially those abolitionists, did start to see him as a martyr, almost as a saint, someone who gave himself up for the cause. Whereas Southerners and slave owners, they stayed angered. So initially, without the whole story out there, people were like, whoa, crazy guy, need to get him, executed. But in the end, the abolitionists were like, he really was on a good cause. He really was on a good journey. But the Southerners, they always stayed angered. So really powerful portrait here. Obviously shows, those two portraits show very different sides of John Brown. And here we are again, turning up the heat on our frog just a little bit more. So let's take a pause. Take a pause. You know what? Why don't y'all walk the long way?
Yes, please.
Why don't y'all walk the long way? We're doing good.
Did you give her the final one?
No, I was gonna get all back. We should have public hangings.
Public?
Oh, that's awkward.
I would be like,
Where's Sabrina? Is that all? Hey, I like this. Hey, turn around. It's really cute.
That's very cute. I love
take that brain break. I know it's been a lot of
Show it in.
shopping.
Hey, look, move. Okay.
It's actually a pretty good story. I hope you appreciate it.
Bit check. Bit check.
Hold on. Get out.
Hold
All
on.
right, I'm gonna make an
No,
end
no.
of year
Wait, let me
highlights
read your
video of all the weird things you've done to the camera.
Let's
All
root
of y'all.
for each other. Okay.
This from Shane. This from Victoria's Secret.
Go.
It's from Nike.
Get out of here. Get out of here. Leave.
Bye.
Sometimes you just gotta let it walk.
Why aren't you going? You ever get mad if I come in here?
Come see us.
just tripped me out.
Do they ever find your, did they ever find your old one? Or your new one? Who'd you order it from?
Yeah, whenever I opened your snap, I was like, what is he doing? Why?
Apple, but I didn't.
What's going on?
Great phone. But it's just nice out there. No negotiation.
Hey, let's it. Okay.
Who did that?
What, Lennon? Hey, video, camera, video.
Hey, you make comment. Look. About what?
And then he takes the night later and says, don't worry, I ain't gonna take it home. Where's the jackass?
Can I say that?
I will not. I don't like
Probably would.
We seen it. But that never got seen. That got home.
No, I know that.
Right now.
The gas station.
What?
You want
Oh, don't.
I don't know.
Yep, y'all are tall enough.
All right. Let me ask you this. How much Civil War learning have you already done in your school life?
Many.
So I got a lot, like rubbing my head, like I can't believe we're going over this again, and then I got not a lot. So I really don't know which it is.
I mean, I think so. I just don't have it under the label of.
Okay, okay. Abby, how much Civil War learning have you done? Okay, Chrissy, how much Civil War learning have you done? I'm polling the class here.
Probably. How long they first started teaching it? Because they never had to go to
Yeah.
every year.
Well, what grade have you passed through some Civil War conversations before?
Fourth
And the reason I ask, here's the reason I ask. Sometimes you guys are like, oh yeah, we read the Diary of Anne Frank in 6th grade. You have that specific memory. Or sometimes you're like, oh, Liberty Kids. We watched that in 5th grade. You have that memory. So my ask here is, I understand we have a topic that's already been introduced to you. Hopefully, we're at the point, and maybe even just this first page vocab, there's some, hey, come on, the side chatter. I know we're not talking about John Brown at this point, all right? Hopefully, we're at the point where even though you have the familiarity with the Civil War, North versus South, blue versus gray, Abraham Lincoln, I got it. Even though you have that starting point familiarity, I hope we're going a little deeper. I hope we're explaining things. This class gets to explain a few things that you haven't heard about before. And as you have grown in wisdom and maturity, you have different aha moments. We move past Abraham Lincoln freeing the slaves. We get to some real underlying issues, and I hope you approach this a little bit more. I have a variety of books. I've kind of changed out my books up front a little bit. And I just pointed out that I change my little library books every week, whether you guys notice it or not. So there's a variety of books. Some of them have pictures. You guys like picture books?
Yes.
Yeah, if you want to borrow, you're always welcome to. Okay, that's where I was going with that. If you're someone, and you know what? There's even DVDs. You could pop in a DVD to your player. Don't know what those are?
Yes.
Kind of like Netflix, but you have to put the disc in first.
Yes.
Yeah, so if you're curious, there's plenty out there. On top of, I have several, in my mind, I have several bonus point challenges lined up that not very many of you take me up on so far. As I post these, and especially as we go into a 5-day weekend, as I post these, and some of you legitimately need points, one, it's a good review. Okay, I do post good episodes. Now, I don't know if it's like as riveting as you expect your entertaining movies to be, but I post good episodes, not just blah, blah ones. And then two, if you really lean into it and pay attention, you'll be reviewing as well as getting bonus points. So those opportunities will come and go. Do not roll to me on May 21st and say, hey, I have an 89, how do I get to a 90? Hey, I have a 79, how do I get to an 80? Or even,
Have
Hey,
a
I have-
99.
hey, I have a 69, how do I pass the class? Do not skip out on these bonus point opportunities and then roll in and try to get something out of me, okay? So all that's our little interlude. That was our little intermission. Books that you can borrow, bonus point opportunities. Where are we at on the page? Where are we going next?
Sexualism.
Woo! I feel like I need to even say the word out loud because I heard selectionalism and selectionalism, and it is sectionalism. So break that word apart. What's your root word? Section. So hopefully you know what a section is, right? Just like you break off a section of a Hershey's bar, you know what a section is? Well, sectionalism is the belief, okay, this is the definition, write it down. The belief that one person's section of the country is better than the other sections of the country. Obviously, the two prime sections that we will be dealing with and have been dealing with is North and South. But don't discount the West. Okay, the West has its own personality, and actually, North and South being the top two players, well, they both want the West to be on their side, so everyone's trying to appeal to those Western territories. Hey, be free. Hey, be slave. Be for my side. My side's better. Sectionalism. My side is better than yours. Surely we don't still have any problems with this today. Jokes. Yeah. We have plenty of division between ourselves still to this day. So you should be able to understand the idea of sectionalism. Today it might be categorized a little bit differently. Okay, political parties for one, Republican, Democrat. We might have a little bit of geographic sectionalism. Okay, SEC. SEC thinks it's better than all the other sections of college football.
What is it not though?
Now, what we need to understand is that our rivalries today, SEC versus Big 12, that's for play, that's for fun. We're not shooting each other over it. This type of sectionalism is going to lead to war. It's going to lead to 500,000 dead people. So it's not a rivalry. It is a fatal flaw in our country's history, and it leads to dead people. Here is a map. This kind of shows how we are at this time, north, south. You can see that the South has more geography, okay, more square miles, especially rope Texas into the South. But which side has more people?
The North.
The North has significantly more people. Which side has more free people?
The North.
If you want to, I know that's kind of the same question, but if you want to take slaves out of the Southern population, they have very few free white people compared to the population of the North. Which side has better industry?
North.
What can industry get you?
Money.
They have money, uniforms, guns, wagons, trains. Which side has more railroad miles?
The north.
The north, yeah. So we're going to talk advantages and disadvantages of each as it relates to the war at a later class. But I'm pointing out that the size of the geography is not the end all be all for the strength of the section. Christy?
Is the reason why Oklahoma is yellow is because of it being an Indian?
That's
reserve?
exactly right. That's exactly right. You know, different maps show it slightly differently, but on this particular graphic, Oklahoma is not a territory that's being considered for statehood. It belongs to the Indians, as we've already discussed, so that is why. That's exactly right, Christy. A lot of times to this day, in little Oklahoma history, Oklahoma is called the Heartland, and you can kind of see it's right smack in the middle of the country, much like a heart in the middle of your chest. All right, sectionalism. So how did we get so sectioned or divided in the first place? I meant to have that not reveal itself. What do you think? What do you think? How did we get so sectioned as a country?
Because we're America. We're stupid.
Well, but I mean at this time, okay, 1850s, walking towards 1860s.
We don't have anything really that supports us, to be honest with you.
Support slavery and you're in the north anyway.
Okay, so Chandler said opinions, and then she elaborated into what I would call the big one, slavery. Hang on to slavery. We're certainly going to be talking about
I
slavery.
said, like, that we had nothing really to connect us. Like, the north does its own kind of thing, the south does its own kind of thing. We kind of try not to bother each other.
Okay, you've kind of already said this, and forgive me if this is belaboring the point. Sanaa, what is the North's kind of thing?
Industries, like
Okay, what is the South's kind of thing?
farming.
Yeah. Okay, so we have like kind of a personality differences. We flat out have cultural differences between North and South as it comes down to their economy. Oh, the economy. That's always going to be a big one because I got my mind on my money and my money on my mind. It's all about that money. I will keep rapping about money until you remember that it's always about the money. All right, it's all about the money. How about just give you $5 to shut up? If I give you $5,
If you give us $5,
you'll remember it's about the money.
Listen, everyone's gonna remember.
Okay, and I don't have to keep rapping?
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
Marley, you got those fake hundreds? Can I get some of those fake hundreds for me? Would that work? Would Marley's fake 100s work?
Yeah.
How about how we were originally designed? You see it as my point number one there. How were we originally designed as a government?
We weren't. It was just like, look at Virginia. That's all you got.
Virginia, that's all you get. What was our first form of government called?
Our confederation.
So this is an important vocab word. Hey, this is an important vocab word because we're about to say this word a lot over the next couple weeks. A confederation, or what will become known as the Confederacy. A confederation means you and I are in agreement with each other, but we maintain our independence.
So like the people that like the national
Not quite like not with confederal. A confederation is, here's a good example for us, our athletic conference. Right now, just as it currently is, I'm not getting into next year. Jeff Davis, Vidalia, Bacon, say another one. Where? Okay, Swain. We are in a confederation, Swainsboro. We are in a confederation of schools. Each school is its own. Bacon is not Swainsboro. Like, let's not even play. But we will be in the same athletic union or the same athletic confederation with each other. This is a confederation. This is important because we're about to have a confederacy as one of our armies, as one of our splits in the country. Now it gets to the point that originally we were not a union. In fact, people identified with their state far more than they would ever say, I am an American. They would say, I'm a Virginian. I'm a Marylander. I'm from Boston. They would not say, I'm a Marylander. That's a word. They would not say, I'm an American. They would certainly not say, I'm from the United States. We're actually not going to have that phrase till Abraham Lincoln rolls it out a little bit later on down the line, the United States. So we have reasons to be divided, right? We've kind of said them, a little bit jumbled, political differences, economic differences, social differences, and then the biggie, Chandler, what is it? Slavery. The big one is slavery. This is the big thing that is dividing us into sections. These sections will most famously be known as North and South. and of course, it represents free and slave, right? This is the type of civil war you're familiar with, but the rest of these reasons are coming into you understanding why. Next vocab word, here we go. The Compromise of 1850. Now remember, the Band-Aid was been put on what? What was that first compromise? All right, so the Compromise of 1850 full on pulls the Band-Aid off of the Missouri Compromise. Yeah, you ever rip a Band-Aid off and then like the scab kind of comes with it too because it wasn't fully healed? Yeah, exactly. All right, you probably won't forget it. Well, guess what? The Compromise of 1850, it might have well just have erased the Missouri Compromise. Compromise of 1850 erases the Missouri. Why the heck would we have agreed to this whole M&M thing if we weren't going to follow it in the future? Because more land gets involved. Sanaa kind of already said it. There was too much land up north to be to satisfy those Southerners with the 36-30 line. So here's my point. We come to this agreement, the Missouri Compromise, and we don't follow it. It sounds real nice on paper. Remember, it just kind of put a Band-Aid on the bullet hole, as Taylor Swift says, but it is not a lasting solution. So we have to have another compromise, which is the Compromise of 1850. Here's its definition.
Well, I was always compromising.
Yeah, so I understand, Sanaa makes a great point. I understand that history is asking you to remember several different compromises, which is why I try to give you that cute little memorable point to it. Sanaa, in particular, Henry Clay is at the heart of all these compromises. That's why he's called the Great Compromiser. Your notes from last week has Henry Clay on them, right? He's the Great Compromiser. He is the one who's brokering these variety of compromises. One of the most powerful men to not be the president of the United States, Henry Clay, the Great Compromiser. Now, here's the reason why we have to have a Compromise of 1850. Because of sectional differences, and we just talked about sectionalism, the issue of slavery in the new territories in particular, because now we do have Oregon Territory, we do have the Mexican Cession, which we talked about as it pertains to Manifest Destiny. We have new states wanting to join our union. Well, in order to make this happen, we decided that 36-30 maybe isn't as fair as we thought it would be, right? There's too much territory to the north, makes the southern people angry. Let's come up with a new compromise. This new compromise states 5 things. I'm about to show you all 5 things. Now, I'll shoot you straight and say that these 5 things aren't like a memorized 5 things, but you do got to follow them in order to kind of get the gist of what it means. So here they are. Number 1, Utah and New Mexico will enter as a state. Number 2 is connected, and they choose whether they're free or slave. So Utah and New Mexico, they're going to enter our union. They have a choice. Will you be free? Will you be free? Will you be slave? Number 3, California, which you got in a second. California enters as a free state. Okay, no choice involved there. California is going to be a free state. Number 4, this has a lasting impact. Number 4 is that all people, highlighted for a reason, all people in the United States are obligated to return runaway slaves to their owners. This had already been in the country as the so-called Fugitive Slave Act. And what it said that is, if a slave runs away from its owner, it is technically property. That slave has to be returned. But what was happening is when a slave entered a free state, and there's a lot of ways that would happen. We talked about the Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman being a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Just suffice it to say, summarize it to say, if a slave, an enslaved person, arrives in a free state, most free staters, northerners, consider that to be a free person. That slave has now found itself on free territory. That slave has found freedom. Well, the Fugitive Slave Act was basically being unenforced in the northern states. Because of the Compromise of 1850, northern states had to agree. Now, how much they would enforce it, that's kind of up to each individual state. But northern states had to agree to more strictly enforce the Fugitive Slave Act. If you want California to enter the union as a free state, northerners, you will agree to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act strictly, more strictly. So, letter of the law, no longer can a slave cross that magical state line and be free of bondage. Now a slave is always a slave. Property is always property. Just like if your car, hear me now, just like if your car was stolen in Georgia and shows up in New York, is it still your car?
Yeah.
That was the attitude. I'm not saying it's right. That was the attitude of slaves and as property. Your slave leaves your state of Georgia and shows up in New York, it is still your property. Now I see a variety of hands, so I'll try to go in order. Christy.
Didn't some slaves escape to Canada?
Canada, being a different country, is a little bit different in terms of that. You know, they won't be bound by the fugitive slave law. And then, since she brought it up, some slaves actually also escaped to the Bahamas. Sometimes that means they had to go further into the South. Yeah, right. Luxury vacation. Let's say a slave's in South Carolina. It would cut through Georgia into Florida to the Bahamas. So kind of going deeper into the heart of the South, but with an escape route to the Bahamas. So Christy, Canada is not involved in the conversation. And as a little extra, I gave you the fact about the Bahamas. Briley.
Is this after Harriet Tubman?
This is amidst Harriet Tubman's life story.
But I'm talking about when she would take like slaves.
Right.
Free, but now they can't do
Right.
that.
Well, this kind of puts a wrench into the whole Underground Railroad. It didn't stop people from trying, and the Underground Railroad is a fascinating sub-concept that we're just not going to be able to spend a whole, enough time on. But this puts a wrench in the Underground Railroad because now no longer can you magically just get to the north. Actually, Christy kind of walked me right to it. Now the Underground Railroad has to go all the way to Canada. So Harriet Tubman and others like her continue to operate, but the Compromise of 1850 certainly wasn't very helpful. Who else had a hand? Abby, do you have a hand? Christian had a hand.
How do other people know who the slave belongs to? Do they have like branded like a cow?
A lot of specifics there, and I can't get into each of them, right? I don't have all the answers, but yeah, there was branding. A lot of times if they were a previous runaway, they'd be branded with an R for runaway. So that type of slave would be more closely matched. And if you're branded with an R on your forehead and you're in and around town, people know you're a slave or a former slave.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
I might have an
I'm
answer.
so sorry.
You're
I'm
fine.
not sorry.
I'm not actually.
What you
but,
got?
So like, what if you was, so let's say you ran away 10 years ago, and this act is good in place. You gotta go back to your slave owner.
Ooh, you asked a good question. I don't know the
Or
reciprocity.
if you bought your slavery, freed yourself, like Frederick Douglass did, like, do you still have to return?
I don't have all the answers on who has freedom papers or who was escaped and then they weren't free anymore. I don't have all those answers. I do know that a lot of people would rush to Canada instead of stopping in Boston or New York or Maine. A lot of people thought that the international boundary was where they had to go now because of that. So that's a good question. I can try to find a better answer for you. Good thought. It does lead me to 2 from now. Hang on, okay? That will lead me to the Dred Scott case a little bit 2 from now. So Compromise of 1850. How do we think about it as a solution? What does it do? Is it holding off on our war for a little bit longer?
Yeah.
How much longer?
Not much longer.
Like Band-Aid
Like 10
longer?
years maybe.
Probably like Band-Aid long, right? That's about it. So one more Band-Aid. One more Band-Aid holding off on our war. So now if I was a guessing person, I'd probably say about 10 years. Just a random guess. If I was a guessing person, I'd probably say it holds off on war for about 10 more years. As a good guess. Here is the Compromise of 1850 territories. So you can see California becomes green, a free state. Oregon votes to be free, so it's a free state. Utah and New Mexico, their slavery is determined by vote. That's why they're orange. And then you have the territories that have already been determined to be north and south. Again, big old Band-Aid slapped onto the western part of the United States. Pretty good political cartoon here. Now the character in the middle of the page, who is that? Can you tell? Clay. What kind of Clay?
Henry Clay.
There you go. Henry Clay, the great compromiser. And what he says is, ugh, I can't keep doing this forever. What is this? Compromising
After
or
compromising.
yeah, let's stick with my analogy of the day, slapping a Band-Aid onto it. And here we have ourselves turning up the heat on our frog one more time. Do you see that we're about to cook ourselves as a country? That's where we're headed. All right, leads to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. I'm trying to show you years on all of these so you can see how we walk forward. 1854. Now, I will say John Brown kind of fits into this time period as well. I already talked about him under slave rebellions, but John Brown kind of fits into this right here, which remember he got his start in Kansas, so that makes sense. 1854, Kansas and Nebraska are not states, they are territories. Well, Congress adds on to the Compromise of 1850 and says that, you know what? Every state is just going to determine its own destiny, slave or free, by voting. At this point, it totally does away with the Missouri Compromise and basically totally does away with the Compromise of 1850. So Henry Clay and his poor headache over there, I don't know if I can keep doing this for forever. His life's work is just null and void with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, right? We have compromised and changed our compromises, and we just do away with all that work anyway. I don't know why anyone would agree that, would trust our future compromises, because all we do is change our minds anyway. And this leads to a period of time known as Bleeding Kansas. Got your blood running on the side of the screen to help you remember that. Here's the reason why it's called Bleeding Kansas. These words won't be on your screen. I'm just going to tell you the story. Kansas and Nebraska were both involved in voting for whether or not they would be free or slave. But much like, not all that different from today, where we have allegations of voter fraud, like how many people voted for Trump in Wisconsin, were they alive, did they have mail-in ballots, were they really on the roll, etc., right? We have plenty of voting fraud issues today. Now imagine 1850, when you don't have online registration, you don't have ID cards, like you go to one polling station and say your name is John, and go to the next polling station and say your name is Jack and vote twice, right? 1850, plenty of room for voting fraud. What people would do is they would stream across the border. Let's say they're just like a dyed-in-the-wool Southerner, right? They're from Georgia, they live in Georgia. Well, they would go to Kansas in order to vote Kansas as a slave state. Now, not everybody was, people weren't falling for this. People knew what was going on. And people who really lived in Kansas and wanted to vote Kansas as a free state, they'd be like, hey, guy who just came across the border from Georgia, you don't belong in Kansas. And it led to fighting. It led to shooting. It led to dying. That's why it was called Bleeding Kansas. This happened a lot. A lot of people left their southern state to go pretend vote in Kansas. They're going to vote for Kansas to be a slave state. But real residents of Kansas, they stood their ground. They shot them up. And that's why it's called Bleeding Kansas. So here we are again, having violence, not full on at war with ourselves just yet, but clearly turning up the heat just a little bit more. Here's a map for you, just kind of showing the Kansas-Nebraska territory. Obviously, that's not the state of Nebraska today. That goes all the way up into the Dakotas and Montana. But this is the territory we're talking about. You can see per the Missouri Compromise, what kind of state should Kansas be? Yeah, if we agreed to the Missouri Compromise, Kansas is a free state. But since we change the agreement and say that everybody can vote their own way, well, Kansas is open to determine whether it's free or slave. Obviously, the South would like another slave state in the country, and that's why a lot of Southerners flocked across the border, trying to kind of rig the election for Kansas to be a slave state. Haven and then Sonoma.
So about this voting fraud.
Yeah, don't bring up the Trump stuff. Let's stay in the 1850s.
Okay, they not have social security numbers?
No, Social Security didn't come around until the 1940s. That's a fair
But
question.
my grandpa was born in the 1930s and he has one.
Well, he got it in the 1940s.
Well, then what about the people that didn't get one? Are they just non-existent in America?
What I'm saying is that our tracking systems were way less good. I'm not gonna get into all the widgets. I'm sure that there was like a local identifier, you might have had a rudimentary birth certificate. You might have had how a lot of people kept records back then? The family Bible. If you weren't written in the family Bible.
Family Bible.
Yeah, if your name wasn't written in the family Bible as born on this day, married to this person, like that was record keeping for a lot of families. So just suffice it to say that there was really bad record keeping, not ID cards, not fingerprints. not social security number. Who's next? Sanaa.
I don't know if you know how this works, but like somebody's existence. Oh. They could be like, hey, I don't know you. Hey, you are very compromised, right? You got
Hey, listen up. Sanaa's walking herself through something. It might help all y'all.
And then the Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. How do you just like keep changing the rules like in like government? Like, you know, when things get passed, you have to like sign these things
Exactly.
and like put stamps on them. And so like, how would you keep rolling out?
You are having that aha moment that would have, Sanaa, if you'd have been around in the 1850s, maybe we would have gone to the Civil War. Because you're saying something that, hear me.
You wouldn't have died.
This is called hindsight, okay? This is called seeing it after the fact. We can clearly see that our country was headed towards problems. Stick with my analogy, we're turning up the heat on ourselves. But at the time, tensions were so high, communication was not very good, okay, across the country. They, of course, didn't have access to all the history that, you know, the history textbooks written in a nice, neat, organized fashion. They couldn't see the problems that they were walking into. Or they didn't care about the problems that they were walking into. They actually wanted the division to divide north from south. Plenty of people wanted the division north from south. So, Sanaa, that's a great aha moment. You're exactly right. Clearly, we walked ourselves into a problem. Kansas-Nebraska Act. So the new way of determining is called, when I say that they vote on whether they'll be free or slave, that's called popular sovereignty, i.e., just let me put some real simple lingo on it, ruled by the people. It means you get to vote for whether you will be slave or free. The majority wins. Just like if I take a vote in this room and say, you know, do we want to take a pop quiz today or tomorrow? I don't know, it's a dumb example. But if you guys vote, or how about this? We want to watch a Disney movie or a sports movie. You guys are going to vote. Majority wins. Welcome to America. That's exactly what popular sovereignty is, except in this case, it has a very important outcome, and the outcome is whether the state will be slave or the state will be free. Popular sovereignty. You got to marry that to the to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Popular sovereignty is married to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Those two things will always be connected. We're clipping right along. I think we're having a great conversation. Some of y'all are asking some really intuitive questions. Yes, ma'am. Go for it.
So like, okay, so they could vote for these things, right? But the only people who could vote was white men.
White males who at this point did not own property, right? Did not have a property.
Yeah, so this is stupid.
That's true. All right, so these ladies point out a great thing. The heck is the majority if not everybody can vote in the first place? I hear that. You're right. You're right. So you are weaving history together in a very good way. You're taking last week's conversation about Andrew Jackson and applying it to today, and you're having a good aha moment. You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
I didn't write down.
Okay, so Sanaa, I told you 2 steps later, I kind of explained part of the Fugitive Slave Act, and that is the Dred Scott case. Or in Supreme Court lingo, this is called Scott v. Sanford, because Scott is the slave, Sanford is the owner, and they're the two people that go to court together. Dred Scott is a slave who, under Sanaa's scenario that she had just said earlier, he was a slave that traveled to free states with his owner, right? His owner willingly took him to a variety of free states, traveling on business, traveling for family leisure, whatever. Hey, slave, come with me because you're my property. Just like, hear me now, right? I'm certainly not insulting anyone. I'm trying to give you an example. Just like if you drive your car to Alabama and Missouri and Arkansas and New York City, you're taking your property with you. That is how Dred Scott, as a slave, as property, was viewed. He was being taken state to state. Well, under the Fugitive Slave Act, he reasonably had to follow his owner. Dred Scott tries to challenge this. Okay, he takes it all the way to the Supreme Court. And he states that since he has lived in a variety of free states, he is, and he should be, therefore, a free man. I've lived in free states. You don't have slavery on the books in this state. I am a free man. So he sues for his freedom. This is the heart of the Dred Scott case. Now it chips all the way up to the Supreme Court. And this is not a government class, but I think you guys know that the Supreme Court kind of gives the final say. And what the Supreme Court says on any particular case can have a very long-lasting implication for decades or longer to come. The Supreme Court rules against Scott, rules for his owner. It upholds all the tenets of the Fugitive Slave Act, and it says Scott is a slave no matter where he is. It says slaves are property. Property can move from state to state regardless of that state's property laws, i.e. slave laws. Therefore, Scott is still a slave, has to stay a slave, is not free just because he's been in a free state. What do you think this did to the tensions between North and South?
How
did they all know about this?
No, I
They
think
didn't have-
when I teach this class in the future, I'm gonna straight up bring a lighter in. I'm gonna light it every time. I don't know.
No.
Forgiveness over permission, I guess.
Might also want to bring a fire extinguisher.
Yes, so this is his owner on the left. This is the guy, no, I'm sorry, that is actually the Chief Justice. That's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who rules against him. And then on the far right, that is Dred Scott. That is the slave who sued for his freedom. So, yes, I will go back. So a very significant Supreme Court ruling. We don't deal with a whole lot of them in this class. Take a government class, you're gonna deal with many more Supreme Court rulings. But this is one of them that you do have to, we gotta know Scott versus Sandler. We gotta know the Dred Scott case.
I'm third grade.
Good. Are we elaborating a
Yeah,
little
my
bit?
third grade history.
Is it because you're a good studier and you've heard it, or is
No,
it?
it's because I've read it.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, okay, that's my page.
I'm glad to hear that. I'll say Mason's class is going over Abraham Lincoln, and they're reading a book about the assassination of him right now in Miss Ivy's class, Chance's mom's class. So I know that you guys, exactly, she's reading this book to the kids, or they're reading this book together. It is from the ELA perspective, but of course it supports history, so that's pretty good. Ask me again.
You said has the North and South like feel about it? How did they
Oh, well, yeah, all right, so, hey, I guess I didn't answer my own rhetorical question. Northerners and abolitionists were angered by the Dred Scott decision. Southerners they felt emboldened by the Dred Scott decision. Because now they can take their slaves, i.e., what is a slave called in this case? Property, right? They can take their property state to state without it getting taken away. So definitely fed
But if you say it like that, no state is really a free state.
If you say, that's great, if you say it like, will you write that down for me? That's good. If you say it like that, no state is really a free state. Okay, Hayden's writing it down in
Oh,
order.
maybe you got it, alright.
That's a
In
good
order.
quote. If you
Hey,
say it like that, no
Put
state
a
is really a free state.
little squiggly line and put Sinai Park beside it.
Yeah, so here we go. Turn the heat up one more time, right? Our frog is almost at a roiling boil. Roiling boil, and our country is almost cooked because of it. Leads me to, here's the punctuation mark, the election of 1860. So what happens in the election of 1860? Abraham Lincoln is elected president. Now, in running for president, he was divisive even as a candidate. He was a Republican candidate for president. He is seen as a Northerner. He is seen as someone who is against slavery. These are all true things about him. Okay, he's a Northerner. He's against slavery. But many people from the South said, if Lincoln gets elected, we don't have a chance. Our way of life, our economy, our culture, the institution of slavery. If Lincoln gets elected, all that is gone. So many people thought if Lincoln gets elected, this is the split in our country. And actually that's true, because even before he swore in at the White House, states started to secede. South Carolina seceded from the Union before Lincoln was even president. Now he was elected, he was the future president, but certain states started to secede, and this is stepping into our next little, stepping into tomorrow. But certain states started to secede even before Lincoln was sworn in at the White House as president. Obviously, we're turning up the heat that one last time. This further divided the North and the South. We are on the edge of secession. I took one step farther and already told you that South Carolina secedes. We're on the edge of secession. Now check this out. Picture here, this is candidate Lincoln. What is he missing from his features?
His hat.
Half the one.
His beard.
The beard. Yes. Abraham Lincoln. Here's a cute little side story for you. Hey, don't close up. I got a couple more thoughts. Even though you're done with your vocab, I got a couple more. Abraham Lincoln was hey, come on. Abraham Lincoln was encouraged to grow a beard by a 12-year-old girl who wrote him a letter. She wrote him a letter and said, Mr. Lincoln, my family supports you, I support you. I'm paraphrasing. She says, you know what would make you look more attractive to the voters? A beard. So because of this young girl's letter to him, he then grows a beard. Yeah, she basically said, hey, you got a really skinny face, and if you grow a beard, you'll look a little more manly. So, anyway, yeah. All right, let me wrap this up. This is actually. I can't grow a beard. I got Swedish heritage. It's never gonna happen, just like Landon. So. Don't let me lose. This is candidate Lincoln. Hey, this is before he was president. He's actually at a debate. He's debating with an opponent here. And obviously this is not a photograph, but a sketching. Obviously this is also pre-beard. So at this particular speech in the 1858, so again, 2 years before he's actually elected president. This is from a speech in 1858 where Lincoln says these very famous words. He says, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Now, a lot of people took this as a statement that Lincoln was for splitting the country. We're going to look in just a second. We're going to look at the full quote, and you're going to see that that's not exactly what he said. Now, this statement itself, does anyone know the heritage of this statement?
Taylor Swift.
I bet you're about to. Not Taylor Swift this time. Actually, Jesus. Jesus says, every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. So language in the Bible, and this is actually in more than just the book of Matthew. It's in 3 of the Gospels. Jesus says, a house divided against itself shall not stand. Now, here's the full Abraham Lincoln quote. A house divided against itself cannot stand.
Hey, I can't hear.
Thank you. It's good. Pay attention. Lincoln says, a house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Now, we could hang out on this quote for a long time and have some real deep conversation. What do you think? Why do you think people thought that this meant Lincoln was going to divide the country? Yeah. So you could go a lot of ways with this conversation. Anna Kate, thanks for chiming in. A lot of people thought that Lincoln, if elected, is going to be a tyrant. He's going to be an authoritarian. He's going to impose military rule in the South. Other people took it a little bit differently and said, Lincoln actually expects us to become two countries. It will become all one thing. We'll let the North be one thing. Let the South be its own other country as one thing. Lincoln can be the president of the Northerners. A lot of people took the quote from that perspective as well. Now, historians, and with extra time as Lincoln as president, a lot of historians believe that Lincoln meant, it was more like a sentiment to say, we need to come together instead of being divided. And since he was speaking to probably a professing Christian audience, and he uses scripture, he uses Jesus' own words in that aspect, he was calling for unity. He was not calling for division. He was calling for unity. So his words kind of got misinterpreted. A lot of people stopped at the first statement and didn't even hear the rest of it. Obviously, in the days before YouTube, you couldn't just rewind and catch the whole speech again. So a lot of people only caught that first sentence. That's what the newspapers reported. That's what word of mouth reported. And kind of it kind of skewed his overall sentiment there. So here we have it. We are at a roiling boil. Our frog is cooked, and we have no choice but to go to war. Let's summarize here. So here are the issues that really divided the nation. Sectionalism, we defined it, we talked it pretty well. Slavery, that's the big one. And then if you wanted to go subset of sectionalism, the big three are culture, economy, and politics. This is the road to the Civil War. We have walked ourselves up to the election of 1860, and tomorrow we will go to the war. The next 2 days, we're going to talk battles and events of the Civil War. Only 2 days, so I hope you won't miss either of them, because we're going to go in depth about certain battles. We're going to go in depth about certain events, but at the same time, it's only 2 days of class, so you know how far in depth can we go? We're going to do the best we can. Pretty fascinating stuff. A lot of people become full on, they give their whole lives to studying the Civil War. They make documentaries, they get scholarships on the Civil War. Hey, come on, you, turn your body, look at me. You, quit dapping them up. You too, quit talking, right here. My turn. We're a smart class, we have side conversations, but dang, y'all guys quit, y'all quit. Don't quit till I say you can, okay? Class is still here. We're gonna dive into the Civil War in these next 2 days. How in depth can you go in 2 days? We'll do the best we can. But it's 2 important days, okay? We're gonna talk battles and events. Some people give their whole lives to becoming a scholar on the Civil War. Some people pick it up as a hobby. They reenact. They do all the extras. We got 2 days for it. We're gonna do the best we can. Pretty important that you be here for those 2 days because it's pretty foundational to this section. At the same time, we got to paddle hard and move on right after that. So 2 fun days coming up, talking about battles and events of the Civil War. I'm trying to make it memorable for you. I think y'all did pretty well when you sketched out, a memorable moment for each Revolutionary War battle. So I'm going to kind of try to repeat that for the Civil War battles. The conversation we had back and forth, my gosh, I loved it. Thank you. That's the type of chatter I can handle. The others that makes a dull war in the room drive me crazy. Yes, ma'am.
What 2 days are you talking about?
The next 2 days of class.
Well, we're here Thursday.
Tuesday, Wednesday. That's okay. So we're going to really do the heart of the war for the next 2 days. And then we're going to round it out with some, review and such.
We're talking about the
Fair question.
Sherman's March.
We will talk about Sherman's March. We're going to look at just how close it came to Allen, Georgia. A little bit north of us. All right. Now you may wrap it up, tidy up. If you got questions on notes, I need to go back to any particular slide, I will. Just let me know.
The Alma City Ball. The Alma City
Well, the geography was here. Alma was not incorporated as a city.
Was a big dish geography. Was there a history?
I'm not sure.
Who made
I really don't know. Christian, you make me wonder. I'm saying that the geography was here, right? Where we're sitting was right here.
Just nothingness.
I don't think I've heard that.
Oh, that's what you're talking about.
Let me ask.